Welcome into Fancred. We're here every day, noon Eastern time, and a big show, a loaded baked potato for you today at Wendy's for lunch, right? If you're on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast. I'm in Los Angeles. And coming up, we're going to be talking about this ugly video that has come out of Knoxville, Tennessee, of a University of Tennessee football player and Jeremy Pruitt. And we'll get into that. I've got a lot of thoughts on it in general. What's in the video, what was said. You obviously, if you're here, you're probably on my Twitter, so you've seen some of the things that I've said about it. But we're going to talk to Evan Rosenblum of TMZ Sports. TMZ posted the video yesterday, and we're going to get his thoughts on the whole situation. Actually, there's a very long video that was posted, I think, by one of the news outlets in Knoxville, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like an hour and a half long, and it is body cam and it is also dash cam video of a player, Jeremy Banks of Tennessee, who was arrested September 15th and taken to jail because of an outstanding warrant. But in the process of the arrest and the drive to the jail, there was a phone call made to Jeremy Pruitt. So we have audio of him that's, in my mind, really almost as bad as what Jeremy Banks was seen saying on that video. We'll talk about that in specific, but I want to get to what else is going on the show. We'll be talking Nationals, a guy who was there last night. If you go to my Twitter timeline, he was taking video in the upper deck, Bram Weinstein. He'll join us coming up later in the hour, as will Sean Gregory of Time Magazine. We'll talk about SB 206 being passed into law and what are the next states that are going to start to vote on this bill. There's 4 states out there now, so that are looking to do it with a bill that they're going to vote on. Additionally, we'll look at Michigan football and the Lions with Nick Baumgartner coming up later in the show. But first, let's go out to our sports celebrity hotline and talk to Evan Rosenblum of TMZ Sports. Of course, as always, on the cutting edge of what's going on.
What's up?
Hey, how you do? You look great, man.
Hey,
Crystal
thanks,
clear.
man. I got my sports hat going on here.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's
man.
freaking awesome.
I'm sitting here with Mike Babcock, who you know.
Yeah, hey, Mike.
One of the best reporters in sports, who was basically running lead on this story. So I figured I'd bring him to get it straight from the horse's mouth on this one.
Hey, Brooks.
Hey, Mike. How you doing? By the way, Mike, I love your voice. It is awesome. My voice. Yeah, your voice, because whenever your voice is doing a voiceover on one of the videos or TMZ, it's just like it's so unmistakable. There he is.
Loud. My voice is just loud.
Yeah. No, it's a really unique.
I scream.
You know what it does? It cuts through the noise. When I'm looking at news, I'm like, wait, oh, what was that?
Yeah, so some people call it the Jersey buzzsaw.
Right.
the wood chipper.
You're right.
So let's talk about this for a second. So how did this story come about for you guys?
I mean, look, this video comes out yesterday. Police release it, and you have this 19-year-old kid who was a good football player for the University of Tennessee who was pulled over with what started as a routine traffic stop September 15th after University of Tennessee wins a football game. And it's about 4 a.m. The kid allegedly makes an illegal U-turn. So the police officer sees, pulls him over, runs the license, and then it comes back that this kid has an outstanding warrant out of Tennessee. And that's when everything kind of just went haywire and took a turn with ultimately him saying some pretty terrible and disgusting things, in my opinion, to the police officers in that car with him.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about this story because you guys posting this story makes it a much, much bigger thing, of course. And the nature of the video, of course, is what creates the news. But what if this video had not been posted? We wouldn't have had.
Question. Well, look, I mean, Brooks, we've been doing here, for years. And every time there's a story that we think is interesting, we'll go through all the video, all the documents. I mean, I think we're pretty much well known for that and finding stuff. You were saying it was a 70-something long video, and our producers, in this time, Mike Babcock was the one leading leading the charge on this one, going through all that video, watching, taking notes and listening. And all of a sudden he's going, wait a second, this isn't just about a kid who's being pulled over for a U-turn. You got to see what he says in this video to the police and how the police respond.
Right. Yeah. Brooks, he started out very polite, in my opinion, to the cops. And before they had made that determination that we are taking him to jail, he was polite. And I imagine he was trying to work his way out of this situation here. And right when they did hook him up, put him in the handcuffs, that's when everything changed immediately. And his tone was completely different with the police. But if you just started watching the first few minutes of this video, you would never imagine that it ended up the way it did, because he was being really polite and respectful to the police.
And you know what, guys, and not to be obsequious or kiss your ass, but I mean, the fact that you're going to listen to that hour-and-a-half video and there's absolutely no indication that there's going to be anything on there. And how many times do you do that? And to me, if you have ESPN, and I'm not asking you guys to speak to this, Fox Sports and all that stuff, that's one thing. But that's what sets you guys apart. That's why you guys are, for me, the most consistent, relevant sports journalism outlet that's out there, that every single day I go to TMZ Sports specifically because I know I'm going to miss something if I'm just looking at the big networks. And it's the little things like, Jesus, this is an hour and a half. Good Lord. I'm going to have to live. But there you are. And you got the headphones on and you got all this stuff going on.
Well, speaking of ESPN, the same way that those guys, built their empire digging through game film and curating the best clips for the audience, you can't take that away from them. They built their empire being able to do that and showing the audience the best clips from everybody who couldn't watch every game out there. And we just felt that there was an opportunity for us to do that, off the field in this space. When it comes to legal, we're really good at that. Harvey Levin, the former investigative journalist, and all that stuff. That's what he's taught us: make more calls than everybody else, do more work, work harder than everybody else, put in the time, and that's how a lot of these stories come to pass. We did the same stuff when we were working Ray Rice, back in the day, and a lot of the Kareem Hunt, all that stuff in between is. We're like a dog with a bone. We don't let it go. We're making the phone calls and we're working these stories nonstop until we feel like we've hit pay dirt.
We're visiting with Evan Rosenblum and Mike Babcock of TMZ and TMZ Sports, and they broke this story, the video of Jeremy Banks. What's that?
I said the hat look.
I'm going to send you a hat. Bro.
No, I dude, absolutely. Looking forward to that. And I'll wear it right here.
Yeah.
But you guys helped to break this story, the Jeremy Banks thing, the arrest of the Tennessee football player, just 19 years old, got a kind of feel for him. And then you've got Jeremy Pruitt. And I want to address the Jeremy Pruitt part in a second. Sure. But in looking at Jeremy Banks, I mean, this was not a case of a guy that was inebriated, right? It was just it wasn't innocent. He obviously had a suspended license. You described that situation. But is part of you in the – go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, what I was going to say is I think the cops cut him a big break because there were a number of times in his video where he was saying things that some reasonable cops could have construed as.
Well, we haven't even mentioned that. We haven't even mentioned that, right? He said basically that I want to get the quote right.
Yeah. I mean, some of the stuff was
the exact quote.
What would you do without that badge, bro? That's all I want you to know. Where I'm from, we shoot at cops. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. Without that badge, you're a bitch and a half. Y'all police are there's a lot of language I can't say out loud.
Right.
I don't
calls them pussies.
Yeah. And then he says, he tells a story to one of the interns and he says, look, he goes, you're lucky that you get to go home to your families. He goes, a lot of cops where I'm from don't get to go home to my family. Don't get to go home to their families if you get
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the cop pushes back on that. And at one time later on in the ride, he says, remember what I told you earlier? And the cop says, oh, that you said that you're going to shoot me. So clearly she's interpreting that as a threat, but he goes, nope, don't put words in my mouth. I didn't say that. And then at one point you hear other officers in the car go, whoa. He goes, if you escalate this thing to making threats to a police officer, you hear them trying to stop him before he says something he can't get out of.
Boy, guys, this is the big question here. And I think you just picked it out. That's the story. The story of, because if he's in an LAPD officers, I'm asking you guys, you have the experience, and he says those things. he's going to be charged with something,
well,
is he not?
It depends on the officer. It really does. It's case by case based on the officer. Some cops have a short fuse with that stuff.
What would be the percentage, you think, just in general, what would be the percentage of chance in a normal situation if you made a threat like that or you said something, you'd be arrested?
Look, I mean,
or charged.
We called. What was the name of the brotherhood we called?
I talked to the FOP,
right?
The Fraternal Order of Police Officers.
The largest group of police officers.
Yeah, something like 400,000 police officers.
It's an interest group.
Yeah, they actually said they accepted his apology. I think that's the other thing here, because he wasn't drunk. He wasn't intoxicated, as far as we know. He comes out with this apology now and says he respects law enforcement officers. Lengthy apology. It is. Do you take him at his word after?
Well, we also spoke to the police department that was arrested. We called their media office and said, "Are you guys going to issue a statement on this?" And they said, "Look, he can say whatever he wants to say. It's free speech. He can say all that." So they're not classifying what he said as a threat, and they're not trying to pursue charges, I guess, on making threats to a police officer. So the cops are, in my opinion, here, it seems like they're cutting him a break by not trying to make a bigger issue of that.
Dude, I think that's a huge break. No, but I will say this: we haven't even, and this is the big elephant in the room. We're talking about Tennessee football, and we haven't even talked about Jeremy Pruitt, but he's in that conversation this whole time. So I think it kind of goes without saying that perhaps if he wasn't a football player, he would be charged additionally if you said something. Well, I think. Go ahead.
He definitely drops that during the
right.
I mean, when he's
and he gives the any.
This is how you treat your players here. I mean, you're having university police officers arresting a university football player. He says that. I mean, the player says that, not the coach. But the coach is, when he gets on the phone. Another point I want to make, though, is when the cop is arresting the football player says, "Get my coach on the phone," and he's saying that obviously because he feels like, not like, "Oh, I need help from my coach," but he's saying, "Get my coach on the phone," because the message he's trying to send to the officers is, "You guys messed up. You're in trouble now,
right? Because
my coach is going to let you guys have it. You guys made a mistake." And when the coach gets on the phone, he's kind of giving the cops a little bit of sass, almost like, I've worked at 4 different universities. I've never seen anything like this.
Right. This is Jeremy Pruitt.
Right. This is
the head coach. Pruitt. Yeah, the head coach.
Yeah, and I understand you're frustrated and your player's in trouble, but like, it's a tough situation for him. But I don't know the.
Well, I think the context of it too is this player Jeremy Banks was finally starting to emerge. Now, they had lost to Florida. He didn't play, he hasn't played well in every game, but he had a good game against Chattanooga, and he was finally starting to emerge as a player. And then and of course, I mean, nobody's got a hotter seat right now probably in the country than Jeremy Pruitt, and they've got, they're in a really tough situation. So it's somewhat understandable, I guess, this exasperation. It's 3:30 in the morning, right?
Right. Yeah. Nearly 4 in the morning. Yeah. I think Jeremy Pruitt was putting some pressure on the police officer, but the police officer stood firm and said, "Look, this is something I have to do. I have no leeway here. It's a warrant. I need to take him in." He even told Jeremy Pruitt, if it was just the suspended license and the U-turn, I was going to cut him a break and let him go. But there's nothing I can do with the warrant. Finally, after going back and forth, Jeremy Pruitt accepted that. But I think the police officer was trying to cut this player a break.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think, you think he was pulled over by a state trooper or something like that? No, this was the campus police.
It was the University of Tennessee police officer, but it might have been different had it been a state trooper.
So it might have been that dynamic. But what this makes me think, guys, and you can't help but think this, Jeremy Pruitt, of course, he says 4 places, and I tweeted this out, I guess the other 4 places that he's coached at. Let me go down and find it. I know he coached at Alabama. Well, he was a former Alabama player. And then he was an assistant coach on 2 different occasions. And that was his most recent stint with Nick Saban. And he also coached at Georgia and Tennessee. So kind of what does that say? I want to point this out, though. And by the way, we're visiting with Mike Babcock and Evan Rosenblum, TMZ Sports, nice enough to hang out with us and talk about this story that they've been digging on. I saw Wes Rucker, who's a very well-known guy in Tennessee, on 247.com. And he talked about what was Pruitt referring to when he talked about, he put it in that context. I've been at 4 places and this stuff doesn't happen. And what Rucker was pointing out was that the football program normally is contacted about these situations so they can follow up if you've got a player that has an arrest. If an arrest warrant comes out, the football office is contacted and they address it. And so I think that may have been what he was referring to, not necessarily let him go, not necessarily I'm trying to strong arm you, but it was an allusion to that possibly. I don't know. I mean,
right. Yeah. Hard to tell what he meant by that. I mean, what we do know is that football generates billions and billions of dollars across the country. And these football coaches, these football programs are powerful on these campuses. And I'm sure it's like that at UT's campus. But this cop didn't give in. If Jeremy Pruitt was trying to pressure him, the cop didn't give in. And
not only that, not only the cop not give in, but the cop, all of the officers who were involved in this particular situation were respectful, and they didn't fly off the handle even when they could have. I mean, there was a couple points where, I mean, if you watch the whole video, what the player's saying is there's menacing stuff, and they kept warning him. They're like, look, you need to calm down. You don't want to take this to the next level. And by the end of the ride, the players, he went from like, I hate the police, you guys suck, to like, you guys aren't so bad. You guys are actually pretty nice people. And then, like I said, we contacted the cops, and the cops were like, look, he can say whatever he wants. We were just trying to do our jobs. We did speak to one officer who didn't want to give us his name, but essentially said this. He goes, it's so funny that you have a guy like this who is saying what he's saying and so anti-police and, calling us names and all this stuff. But if he was in need and needed our help and he called 911, we'd be there to help him in a second. So he's
right. No questions asked. Well, and I do want to, this whole conversation, and I mean, you have to acknowledge it. I think the police did a nice job on it, and it makes you wonder, the effectiveness of body cam and dash cam, having that there. But guys, I can't thank you enough for jumping on a moment's notice. Great job on this story. And by the way, you guys are on television every single night, right?
Yeah, man, we're shooting the show. We're shooting TMZ on TV right now. We had to take
a break. FS1 every night, right?
FS1 every night, TMZ Sports.
You got it, man. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brooks. I'm going to hit you up for your address. I'm sending you a hat.
Awesome. Take care.
Thanks, Brooks.
Thanks, Mike. So that's Mike Babcock, Evan Rosenblum, and Evan is the executive producer, been there a long time, and they're both on the TV show, and you'll see them both occasionally with Harvey on the TMZ Live that comes out 15 times a day. And I've been down to their office and visited with them and whatnot, and so great guys. And but what I was saying before, it's the truth. If you want to know really what's going on in sports every day, not just the underbelly, but just a lot of basic stuff that's not reported, those are the guys to go to. And so TMZ Sports has really been a revelation. And obviously they deserve all the credit in the world for putting all those hours in and what we just talked about, right? I mean, when you look at the story and the way it's being reported as really unfortunate, but it's very topically reported, superficially reported. What we just got from those guys, you're going to get more of that on the television show, right? As they're nailing everything down, and they have an infinite amount of experience when it comes to those situations. I want to get to some comments on the show. Johnson comments here on the Fancred app that there's a massive discipline issue. And when he's talking about, Johnson, in the context of Jeremy Pruitt, like poor performance is one thing, massive discipline issues and entitlement are another matter entirely. And Johnson, I think you make a good point to an extent. When we heard Evan Rosenblum tell us some things that we haven't seen out there reported, Johnson, right? We haven't heard that, or, necessarily up until this point when these guys came on, that Jeremy Banks was saying, get my coach on the phone. And I think from an entitlement perspective, I don't like the word entitlement normally in the context of college football and basketball players, because it's a massive injustice them not getting compensated. But in this particular case, there is a certain amount of entitlement where they want to be held to a different standard than you and I in that situation. And there's no doubt that's going on there. Of course, we all create that, right? In the way that we treat sports ourselves. But that's a good point. And let's see. Mark asks, is this the straw that will break Jeremy Pruitt's camel's back? And Mark, I really don't think so. I mean, even though this young man said some terrible things, and it's really unbelievable that he wasn't charged with something. Now, I'm going to defer to Evan and Mike on this situation, and because they weren't necessarily open and shut that would happen. But I'm really surprised that he wasn't charged with additionally making threats on a police. I mean, it's amazing what he was saying. I think the mitigating circumstances, the number one thing, of course, is Tennessee football, right? And then number two, he hadn't been drinking. They didn't find anything in his car, no weapons, no narcotic, nothing. So I think that's part of it. And it doesn't sound like he had a criminal record of any kind. So he comes into that situation. That's why he wasn't arrested. Those two elements. But Mark, in the case of this situation, is this something that's going to cause Jeremy Pruitt to lose his job, or is this the final straw? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And I think it's going to get a lot worse for Tennessee before it gets better this season or into the future, because they got to play Georgia this week. They've got to play Alabama coming up. They've got a monster schedule, as they do every year, but it's only going to get worse for Jeremy Pruitt. Now, we've been reporting here, Mark, that, and I've confirmed this through sources, that Peyton Manning himself, the man, number 16, he has been assisting Philip Fulmer in a sense. That might be the wrong word, right? I'm not so sure I don't know for a fact that Phil Fulmer said, hey, Peyton, I want you to go out and look for candidates as contingency candidates if and when Jeremy Pruitt's fired. But I know that Peyton Manning has been involved in that process. And I know that from as good a source as I could possibly have. So I can guarantee you that Peyton Manning is involved right now in looking at contingencies in the event Jeremy Pruitt is gone. Now you're going to hear, it's like TMZ Sports. You're hearing that from me here. You're not hearing that from anyone else on any talk show. And we break news like this every single day. But the point is that when it comes to Jeremy Pruitt, okay, the fact that Peyton Manning's doing that, right, tells me he's not going to make it, because there's no chance that they're going to turn the season around, because their schedule is too difficult. And I think we got a great indication of that last season. The first game, of course, Georgia State, but still you're kind of like, first game. Last week, I think, was the real indication. And I think it was very telling that Florida actually kept out a couple of good players that could have played because they didn't feel that Tennessee was a threat. And you've seen some regression on that Tennessee team from existing players who were with Pruitt last year, especially at the quarterback position. So I think Jeremy Pruitt's going to be gone anyway. The one thing I'll say about it, and I reported it earlier as well, and I'll bring it up again. If you're going to fire him, which it certainly looks like you're going to, right? Why wouldn't you just do it now? Or wait till the end of the season, I guess, but just do it now. And I don't think this instance, this situation is going to play into it at all. I really don't. Because, I mean, if you're going to use that as an excuse to fire him, that would be weak. You've got a lot better reasons to fire him. But my big point on this is, why would you wait to fire him in the middle of the season? As some people are reporting. Some people are reporting that he's going to be fired after the Alabama game, after the Georgia game, whatever. The only way you fire him in season is if they lose to UAB at home. They're going to lose to Alabama and Georgia. We know that. It's going to happen. They might beat Mississippi State. It's possible. Mississippi State looks terrible. It looked awful last week. But what I'm hearing is he is going to be fired in season. This has been reported by a few people. I've confirmed that. And Phil Fulmer is going to be the interim coach. And I don't know if this has been reported, and I haven't said this on the show, but Phil Fulmer is in coaches' meetings. He's requiring the game plan to be submitted to him. It's an untenable, unworkable situation at Tennessee. So you got the scoop, Tennessee fans, but we're going to keep talking college football. Big story, of course, is Jim Harbaugh. We're following him. That's a big game for Michigan coming up against Iowa. And did they break through last week against Rutgers? Who the hell knows, right? But they win that game 700-0. We don't know. But we've got a guy who's on the ground covering Michigan coming up. He's at Media Day today. And we're going to get the scoop on Michigan football and Jim Harbaugh's status and situation. We do a lot of college football. So we're going to get to another guest coming up here in a second. And dovetailing into that is this issue about fair pay for play, right? I don't even use that title when it comes to this idea of athletes benefiting financially from their likeness, right? That story that's out there, the California law that just was signed into law by the governor, Gavin Newsom, this week. I hate the titles of laws because a lot of times you'll have bad laws with good titles. So it's SB 206, the bill, and it was voted into law. It'll be enacted in 2023. But now we've got 11 different states. That's why you have to follow me on Twitter. I'm the only one following this story with the actual number of states. Where are their bills in of those 11 states? Which states actually have bills waiting to be voted on? So it's possible we could wake up in the morning and this state or that state has also passed this bill into law. It's the same principle. The other states now are following up and copying what California has done, right? California is out front on it and has broken the dam on it. And now you've got not only 11 states looking at it with their legislatures, you've got 4 bills out there. And we're going to, over the next few days and weeks, cover this story like nobody's covering it because I think it's a critical story. Critical. It is an earth-shattering story as far as the NCAA is concerned, and that's why they're so hysterical in addressing it right now. But we're going to cover it in that we're going to try to get a hold of some of the politicians, some of the state representatives and senators who are sponsoring legislation in these states and get them on the show. Because I'm not all that interested in most of what they're going to have to say. Don't tell them, right, when they're on. But what I'm interested in, what are the prospects of it passing? That's what I want to know. How close, let's say, is Florida to passing such a law like California? Because I think that's the key. So in the case of Florida, it's been reported in the last 24 hours that there is a bill that has been submitted, that is essentially the same bill that was passed in California, right? And if this bill is voted on and it's voted into law, you've got California and you've got Florida who are going to allow college athletes at the University of Florida, USC, Stanford, Cal, Florida State, you name it, Miami. Those athletes are going to have the opportunity to benefit from their own likeness in a commercial sense if that happens, right? And Florida may vote on it this year and enact it this year. That's going to be a game changer. What's happening right now in California isn't necessarily a game changer. 2023? Why? Why is it 2023? That's a huge cop-out on California's part, in my opinion. The sponsor of the bill, Nancy Skinner. We may get her wrong, and I want to ask her about it because, you get the whole phony baloney defense as to why it wouldn't start till 2023. It kind of takes the veracity out of that whole thing. But Florida, in a bill that's being sponsored by Keon McGee, that bill, HB 251, may be voted on here shortly. And if it's passed It will go into effect immediately. And then you've got Florida athletes out there. I mean, where they're going to have that opportunity. But more importantly, Dan Mullen at the University of Florida, the head coach, Willie Taggart at Florida State, the head coach, the beleaguered head coach, Manny Diaz at Miami, and all the schools in Florida. The critical part of and I want to emphasize this, I'm going to keep saying it, is recruiting. That's everything. That's everything. So Cam Smith is our producer in Boston. I'm Brooks Melchior in Los Angeles, and we're here every day, Monday through Friday. You can set your watch to us, noon Eastern time on Fancred. We just broke down the Tennessee situation with the TMZ guys, Mike Babcock and Evan Rosenblum. And now we're joined by Sean Gregory of Time Magazine. Sean, I appreciate you coming on, man. Thanks.
No problem, Brooks. How are you?
And thanks for your patience.
That's okay. Hopefully it's technologically okay here.
So you've been covering for Time Magazine, I know, this story. And I just want to get your thoughts, first blush on SB 206 and what we're seeing hurtle through the air right now.
Yeah, I think it's a huge story and it's a game changer. I hate to use that cliche. This has been a long time coming, the paying players issue. And there was always a thought that the first step would be third-party endorsements. The schools, they for a long time they've said we don't have the money to pay players and such. Whether that's true or not is very debatable. Of course, they have the money to pay players; they just choose not to.
Right.
So it's kind of the Olympic model has been floated as a first step, where the schools themselves aren't paying everybody the same or paying one more than the other. It's third-party licensing deals, endorsement deals, local commercials. It can go a whole bunch of different ways. So there was a thought that maybe Congress would pass a national law, or maybe the NCAA would change the rules and allow this kind of first step for fair player compensation. And I really saw state legislatures as a kind of a way to go, especially in this way where one big state, the most populous state in the country, passes a law and other states follow. You mentioned you've been tracking them, 11 in the works, either laws, bills filed or in the works. And we should expect more to come. So it's in a way, it's not surprising. We've been working. It's been a decade-long process of public opinion change on this. But once California passed the law, to see so many different, it's still early. A lot of politicians are probably capitalizing on the publicity, and whether it goes goes to different places in these states, we'll see. But it's something that's going to be fascinating to watch as it plays out.
Visiting with Sean Gregory of Time Magazine, we're talking about the Fair Play to Pay. I shouldn't even tried that. The Fair Pay to Play Act. Jesus. So what's really, and this is what I love about your story in particular, is that you recognize the impact of Ramogi Huma,
right,
who nobody knows who that is. Ramogi Huma is the president of the National College Players Association, and he has been around forever, right? Former UCLA football player, efforting quietly in the background, not overtly confronting people nationally or publicly. And I guess the story is he was quietly working behind the scenes. I mean, what kind of impact do you think he had on this California thing happening?
Yeah, big impact. Ramogi, their organization pushed to unionize players, tried to help a unionization push a few years back that didn't really work
at Northwestern.
At Northwestern, he was involved in that. He's just been a resource for players who want to advocate for themselves. They're an advocacy group, and he worked with state legislator Nancy Skinner, who was the lead kind of author on this deal in California. He's been in Washington pounding the pavement on this stuff, and he deserves a fair amount of credit for being, as you said, a, kind of behind the scenes, quiet, informed, but hardworking leader on this. And, I think the other thing is California in this environment, California sees itself as a nation state, as Gavin Newsom said. And the government prides itself on being out front on different legislations, environmental legislations, business regulations. We've seen the Trump administration clash with California on some stuff. And it kind of says something that maybe this law, it's got the bipartisan support. There probably won't be a federal lawsuit about it, which I think says something that, it's kind of agreed upon that these players demand a fairer share.
Boy, this is really a
deserve a better share.
When you're trying to figure out, okay, is this actually going to happen? Is something substantive going to take place? Are the players actually going to break through on this thing? I think the fact that it's such an opportunity, a bipartisan publicity opportunity, and the first huge step has taken place with California, the significance of that, it's such a counterintuitive, dissonant situation that is really characterized by the NCAA itself, that here you have Stanford, the president of Stanford, coming out and saying, no, we don't want this, right? I mean, it makes no sense when everybody knows, everyone in America knows, that it's a massive injustice what they're perpetrating really on the players. And when you think about the fact they don't even get guaranteed health care and writing, none of those college football players has guaranteed health care while they're playing. They're beholden to the teams. And so we all know that. So what's it going to take? Here's the other part of it, in my opinion, Sean. When you look at Congress, there's been a lot of congressional hearings about the NCAA and the injustice of it all, and that we should think about paying players. That's happened in the past. And the NCAA has been effectively lobbying those politicians, right? Whereas in California, maybe they were blindsided, I suppose, but they might not have had that we'll put it in quotes, lobbying opportunity, right, in California that may have enabled that to pass. Now the question is going to be, are there politicians out there that want to not only get publicity, but consummate it at that publicity? Tell me about Pennsylvania, because that's another huge state.
Yeah, it's really interesting how that went down. They called Ramogi right after it was announced. One of the legislators from the Pennsylvania House got on the phone with Ramogi and kind of said, hey, and they had met before on some steel worker stuff, some union, Ramogi kind of worked with the steel workers union to kind of strategize for the college players when that was going on a few years ago. Anyway, so he knew Ramogi, and they got on the phone, said, chatted about some of the language, and kind of confirmed that this was actually happening. And then within 4 or 5 hours, circulated a
4 or 5 hours. It happened in 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, it was really fascinating.
I mean, this is a powerful thing that we're tapping into.
Yeah, and the representative, Dan Miller, I hope I got that right, because I quote him in my story.
Right. It's Dan Miller.
Dan Miller, okay, great. He made the point that, not, the fairness point, but also we want to keep up. Like, in their minds, he also wants good football teams in his state. And there's a particularly big football program in his state that kind of drives conversation in that state. And these folks are realists. They're saying, hey, listen, if California is going to be able to offer endorsement deals to recruits, it's in our interest to do the same here in Pennsylvania. So he's trying to get out ahead of, prospects leaving a very football-rich state to go somewhere else. That was interesting too. So it's a mix of I think there's a sincere, effort and messaging that this is the fairest thing to do. But there's also some politicians or sports fans.
Totally. They'll be the opposite of that.
It'll be really interesting to see, what happens in, say, Alabama. If this kind of goes forward, the NCAA is going to sue, and there might be injunctions, and the law goes into effect in California in 2023. So we're still
Well, Florida
ways
could be
away.
2020. That's
Oh,
just been
yeah.
announced in the last, in the last few days, or in the last 48 hours.
It'll be
That
interesting if that, maybe if it'll help. They'll be lobbying in Florida to kind of push it back. And it'll be interesting to see if it goes forward, if the date, if there's any compromise on the date. Maybe that's a negotiating ploy. Hey, we're going to say, let's start right away. And then, all right, well, maybe we'll do it, but it has to start later. So it'll be interesting to see how the dates kind of come out too.
And so we're going to do one more quick question, Cam, and then we'll move over to Bram here in a second. But there's been questions about Title IX. Megan checks in on the comment line here on our show asking about the possible implications for Title IX. This is such a mess right now trying to figure it out. Nobody has any idea how this will happen as a practical application. And what really matters right now so much is Florida going to get it in 2020? Would Pennsylvania do 2020?
Right.
As an immediate, but I think it just speaks to the fact that we're talking about this at all and how confusing and complicated and contrived it is, speaks to the level of injustice that has been perpetrated for over 100 years. That's what's causing this massive, crazy confusion, is the fact they're just not simply compensating the players.
Right. And Title IX is an interesting question, and there's so many different sidelights to explore on this. And when in the course of reporting this issue for a long time, Title IX has come up, and this is just kind of from my reporting and read of the situation. Don't quote me as a lawyer on this, but my sense is, since schools aren't paying these players here, and private companies presumably are, it shouldn't be a Title IX issue. I mean, Title IX guarantees equal representation, and whether
very good point,
equal benefits is part of it from the school's perspective is up for debate. However, the schools here aren't providing the benefits. It would be the local McDonald's, the local commercials, and a point that Nancy Skinner from California made, which I think is important. This could be very good for female athletes. Very, very good for female athletes. There might be female athletes in, lower revenue sports that are standouts on campus in their towns. They might not.
Yeah.
The sport might not, offer many professional opportunities, and this might be their time to cash in on their unique athletic talents. So anybody can get a deal under this law, and so it'll be really fascinating to see how it plays out for women athletes as well. It could be a really, really good thing.
Sean, thanks so much for hopping on, man. This is great.
No problem.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
That's Sean Gregory of Time Magazine. And now we're going to jump out to Washington, D.C. and talk baseball. Really? Yeah, we're going to talk some baseball, and we'll talk some NFL with Bram Weinstein, who's going to join us from the sports capital, ESPN 630. And you remember him as an ESPN Sports Center anchor. I certainly do, Bram. But thanks a lot, man, for jumping on.
Hey, Brooks, I know. Trust me, we needed to talk about something other than the Redskins this week. Trust me.
Jesus, yeah, I would imagine. And who would have dreamt that we would be having this kind of a conversation about what happened last night? So you were just describe last night your personal experience, because you were at the game.
Yeah, I went. We call them new caps around here because they have had a very similar trajectory as the Capitals did here, where they've been really good, they've been really close. They lose in awful ways in the postseason. They've been in the playoffs 5 of the last 8 years. They've been in 3 previous elimination games. They were all here. They lost all of them. They have never advanced.
Oh my God.
They've never advanced in a round. So I don't know if that counts last night as advancing in a round, but it was the first, what we would describe as like critical big playoff win that they've had with a group of people that they should have been winning with all along. And it was awesome. And listen, the stadium had like the effect of when it was 3-1 in 7th inning and Scherzer isn't Scherzer. Everyone is sitting there going, here we go again. And the hit by Soto, I think, literally changed everything. It was amazing.
So, I mean, Washington went berserk with the Capitals. We saw that.
Yeah.
What about the Nationals? What about D.C. and that surrounding area? Is this going to be a really, we got the Dodgers coming up. Are people really going to be paying attention to it?
Yeah, they are. I mean, Like, so I think DC's a lot like LA, except around the Redskins, in that we like winners, right? So when the team wins,
You're in DC, dude. It defines DC, right?
Well, like, listen, like it's not LA and like as hard to get to the game, but it's not easy, you know? So
Right.
we've got the late arrivals. It is a transient place. You guys are entertainment capital of the world. We're political capital of the world. A lot of people here don't live here, and they glom themselves onto this. And, you know, the one exception is the Reds, believe it or not, is still the Redskins. And the larger story here is there's a long growing apathy for the team that we can discuss if you want to. But this is a better sports town than people kind of give it credit for. But if you are not winning, they won't go to the effort to show up. It doesn't mean they're not paying attention or they're not interested or they're not into it. It's just that we're not Boston, we're not Philadelphia, we're not New York, we're not going no matter what. Like, so, and that has represented itself now in the one happened, and that's at FedEx Field with the Redskins, where people are just literally not going to the games any longer. But with the Nationals, no, I think it's an all-in thing. Now, is it going to be like what happened with the Capitals a couple of years ago, when basically the town was taken over and there was a giant parade for 3 weeks? I don't know. You know, like, I don't know. But I will say this: we really enjoyed how much drinking the Capitals did afterwards and publicly drinking. And the Nationals apparently can go toe to toe with them. So,
well, the whole principle of the Stanley Cup, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you have that whole principle of a Stanley Cup, and that's kind of a unique thing. But was that also a function of not having a championship forever?
Not having a championship in a really long time. I think, like, a lot of relief. Like, there was this part of, I don't know how they could have one of the top 5 players literally all time on their team and him never win, right? Like, that never made sense. And they were consistently, it wasn't like the team underperformed. Like, they were the 1 seed in the NHL playoffs like 4 times, you know?
Right.
So it wasn't like, and the team never really changed all that much around them. Like, all the other star players stuck it out, and there were moves here and there. And then it finally happened. It really should have happened the year before. They, for the first time, long time, they had gone and actually made like real trade deadline moves. And it didn't work. It blew up in their face again. And that winning, I think, was more relief than anything. And it turns out we throw really good keggers around here. So I didn't know this. And we're about to find out with the Nationals too. Now, that said, like, the best of the postseason might have happened last night for them. Because if Scherzer's going to be that the rest of the way, then they probably don't beat the Dodgers. And they certainly, we've already proven it this year, won't beat the Braves. So, you know, we'll enjoy that as a minor win. But from 12-31 to that last night, it's been a pretty good ride.
Now, I don't know about everybody else who might be watching this, but I'm not a DC guy, no connection. When I was, and I know I'm watching it without all the context necessarily that you've laid out. I know the Nationals have choked over the years. They have that reputation. So anybody who's following sports kind of understands that going in. And even though the way it worked out, the crazy finish, the celebration was so over the top that I'm thinking to myself, okay, am I Rip Van Winkle? Is this the World Series or something? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? You know, you're part of it. You're the reason it was going on.
It's the second. Go look at the video of them clinching a wild card, and you would think that they won a championship. Like, Brian Dozier, as it turned out, like, knows how to really salsa dance topless, and the ski masks are on, the ski goggles are on,
right?
And it's like full.
Now, has that been a discussion? Has that been a discussion?
I went up there that day, and I'm like, something's not right about this. Like, this feels really wrong. Like, they didn't even win their division. Like, it doesn't feel right. And I was told that, I know some of the members of the team, and they were basically like, listen, like, I want you to understand this. Like, we don't think we won it. We just actually really like it. Yeah, they just said, we just really like each other. We like to party together. And we learned this with the Capitals a couple years ago. As it turns out, like, those guys party hard together all the time. And it's probably the reason why they remained competitive all along. I read this quote recently. I thought it was really strange. Like, when Joe Madden was right before he got fired by the Cubs, there was a quote where he basically said that he wished his team would go out and drink more together than sit in their room and play video games. And it's like counterintuitive to think like that's what you would want your team to do. But in our experience here, these Nationals are far more competitive so far in the playoffs than the previous versions of them with Bryce Harper on them. and they really genuinely like to hang out with one another. And we found this out with the Caps too, that like they personally like each other and they party together and they play hard and they work hard, and you have to like it when it works. It's easy to criticize, right? It's so easy to be like, these guys are idiots, like, you know, like popping champagne to
Right.
get into the game, and it might last one night. But they basically told me, they're like, no, it's just that we like to hang out together. Don't take it for anything more than that.
We're visiting with Bram Weinstein of the Sports Capital, ESPN 630 in DC. Also has the podcast network, the Empire Podcast Network, Empire network.com. Is that right? Did I get that right?
There it is.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We got you. Got a different angle now, man.
All right.
Wheeling around. So I want to talk to you quickly about the Redskins, if that's okay, right? I know you're enjoying the aftermath,
Sure.
right? You can't talk to somebody in DC without bringing up, and of course that's what Dan Snyder is counting on. That's the whole business plan. We're a captive audience in DC, but maybe not anymore, because I was looking at the television ratings for the local markets, and I saw a couple of weeks ago for a home game, I think it might have been a road game, but you guys are all the way down to the bottom. I was in a state of shock. I mean, give us a sense of the level of this apathy.
It's really surprising, and the 1 year sighting was really shocking to me too. I mean, we've been following this, so we've been seeing this, and the attendance is really down too, and the place is overrun with visiting fans. There's gonna be 40,000 Patriots fans in the stadium this weekend.
What?
Yeah, there will be. So,
40,000?
I mean, gotta be. Yeah, gotta be. So, the game you're citing was week 2, and the Redskins were playing the Cowboys at home. Okay, and they rated below the Arizona Phoenix market. Okay, and the Cardinals were playing the Ravens. Right. So, all right.
Wow.
They have like the number 1 overall pick, and I get it. And it's the second week rivalry game. They're on the road. It's an early start, so it's 10 a.m., local time in Phoenix, and they outrated it per market share than Washington did for a Redskins-Cowboys
Wow.
game. In week 2, don't forget, in week 1, this was before the Redskins had become the abomination of the first 4 weeks of the season. They almost beat Philadelphia in week 1. So I don't know what exactly has happened here, but largely the fan base does not trust the ownership, does not like the team president, hates the way they communicate with the team. They largely have been unsuccessful. They don't win a lot.
Go ahead. We got you.
Did I lose you? Am I back?
Yeah. No, you're back. We got you.
Oh, good. So anyway, largely there has been a level of apathy that has grown over time. It used to be like when they had a season like this, people got really angry, right? And so, good or bad, the attention was there. People are tuning out now. They don't expect much from them. They think they're going to mess up. They don't believe in this. And you would have thought if anything was going to be a shot in the arm for them. They went and drafted a franchise quarterback, and he hasn't moved the needle yet. And granted, he's barely played, but he hasn't moved the needle yet either. There's a lack of trust between the ownership and this team and the way they communicate with this fan base. And they're tone deaf to what's happening. They don't make changes that people want. They listen to their fan base. Fans don't like the stadium experience. There's not much they can do. That'll change in the next 5 to 10 years when they get their new stadium. But they do not listen. And the fans want widespread
revolt. Sounds like
change to them. And they've refused to do it. Just
what you mentioned, the stadium. What's the story on that? I mean, how are they going to get a stadium?
So that's tricky right now, actually. Like, they're going to get one, obviously, but that's really tricky right now. So their lease is up in 2027. So they have some time here, but they've been talking the last couple of years to get a new stadium, and everyone hates FedEx Field, and they own the property. They can get rid of it and flip it and sell it, turn it into a mall or, whatever they want to turn it into. It's right off the Beltway in Washington. It's prime real estate. So they're going to move out of it. Everybody wants them to go back to RFK. The problem with RFK in Washington is it's on federal land. The federal land is owned by the federal government. to get it into the hands of Dan Snyder, they would have to sell it to the local government, the district city council, and then they could determine what they would do with it. And everyone believes they would give it to Dan to build a stadium there. But this is amazing. So last winter, December at some point, in one bill in Congress, it got slipped into some kind of bill where it didn't belong, where they were going to sell off this part. Yeah, they were going to stick it in. They were going to stick it in one of these bills. Very quiet. No one knew about it. And then you'll recall there was a government shutdown, and the government shutdown stopped all legislation from being passed. And then people found out that this was in federal legislation to sell the land, likely to go to the Redskins owner. There were a ton of protests, and it's been off the table since. Now, if Donald Trump gets reelected, there's possibility that'll go back. Dan Snyder's been a big supporter of the president. If he doesn't, I don't know that actually happens with a new administration. And that would take RFK's site, or DC essentially, because that's the only one we can think of that would work for something like this. It's been totally redeveloped here. We don't think it'll happen. So then it's Maryland or Virginia. The governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, pulled a site off the table for them and said, forget it. You don't want it, can't have it. It's right near, there's a giant MGM Grand that was built out not far from where FedEx Field is. And it actually would be a pretty decent site. Maybe not, you're not going to get everybody happy. It's a big city. It's hard to get around for some people in certain areas. But he took that off the table. And then so everyone thought he were going to Virginia, that's where the training facility is now. Loudoun County is one of the fastest growing, fastest developing counties in the country. It's where a lot of the young wealth is going. It's a tech sector in Tyson's Corner and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, Amazon came in and put in HQ2 in Virginia. So all of these tax incentives were siphoned over to that company. And suddenly, they're not talking to the Redskins anymore. So I don't know where the stadium's going to go. I think it's going to take some time to shake out. If I had to guess, it'll probably end up in DC at RFK when they figure out a way to get that land. But until that happens, it's completely up in the air.
Man, you just answered like 14 questions I was going to ask. That was unbelievable. That was
you
awesome.
asked a very complicated one. I should have told you initially that was a very complicated question you were asking.
Well, we can confirm he's a talk show host. And man, I can't thank you enough for being patient and hanging in with the technology here. And it's only going to get better. Look forward to doing it again, Bram.
Yeah, I love talking to you, Brooks. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
That's Bram Weinstein in Washington, D.C. He's on the Sports Capital, ESPN 630. And as you can hear him, a talk show host, but he's outstanding. Very coherent, very concise. And it's a complicated issue. My thought on that situation is, and Mark, by the way, asks in the comments, if there's something that can be done to impeach Dan Snyder. And the answer is no, Mark. And I didn't put that to Bram because I can answer it myself, because we've had owners like Dan Snyder in the NFL from the beginning of time. And this is a monopoly, a government-sponsored monopoly. And Mark, until there's some sort of incentive to create real competition amongst the organizations, the teams in the NFL, real competition, nothing will ever happen when it comes to ownership. I mean, Dan Snyder doesn't have to worry about it. If they lose, he doesn't have to be competent. And this just repeats itself over and over again. And of course, it's the function of the money and the collective bargaining, right? The Packers are not truly competitive as a different business with the Redskins or the Giants. How is that? It's because it's a monopoly, right? It's one business, one company. And there's nothing the people that follow these teams can do about it. The Cardinals are probably the best example, but look at it this way, Mark. I don't want to depress you, but the Cleveland Browns have never been to the Super Bowl, right? Nobody ever brings that up. The Detroit Lions. The Lions are one of the original NFL teams, right? Never been to the Super Bowl. Think about that. Now think about that in the context of the Patriots. When you hear people say, oh, they're geniuses, they're deities, right? Obviously, they're good at what they do, but are they that good? Or is everyone else like Michael Bidwell, who I mentioned yesterday, the Cardinals owner, who gets rid of his general manager and coach after 1 year in Phoenix with Arizona. And who does he bring in? A new general manager in Cliff Kingsbury, who had a losing record at Texas Tech, no head coaching experience besides that one school where he's a legacy, where he went, where he was a great player. They fired him. And the best job he could get after getting fired was an offensive coordinator position at USC. USC, think about it, where they are right now. And Michael Bidwell thinks it's a good idea to hire him as head coach? Really? And that's why the Cardinals have done nothing for a century. And keep in mind, this team, the Cardinals, has been owned by the same family for going on 90 years. It's in the same family. The same people are running it over. It's incestuous, right? Nothing's changing. So when you ask that question, that's the answer. Can we move out Dan? No, there's nothing you could do unless he does something crazy, illegal, criminal. I mean, so it is remarkable, though, the transformation, what has happened, the decline in interest in DC, because the Redskins were one of those teams that you had to wait 9 years just to get on the waiting list. Not anymore. So speaking of the Detroit Lions, who I just invoked, we're going to bring in now Nick Baumgardner, who covers Detroit sports, that area of Michigan for The Athletic. He's a columnist and a reporter. Great guy to talk to about the Detroit area and those teams. And Nick, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on.
No problem, Brooks. How are you?
I'm doing great. And so you're at Media Day, right? Big Ten Media Day?
I'm not actually today. No, I'm all football right now. So no big. I did not go to listen to Jim Delaney tell us why guys shouldn't be paid for the 5,000th time. So I skipped that.
But I saw your tweet on it. So what was your response to that, or what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the same old thing that we've been hearing from Delaney forever, right? It's it's slippery slope. I think he made a really kind of odd comment today about how he didn't feel like. He didn't see the difference between the NIL and pay for play, which is, I mean, it all goes back to protecting, the system that's made these guys rich and wealthy and everything else. And Jim Delaney's got like 80 days left in office. I doubt the incoming commissioner, Kevin Warren, I believe is his name. I doubt he's got any different opinion on this, but it's getting old. It's getting old listening. I mean, this, it's getting old listening to the same old guys say the same song and dance about why guys shouldn't be able to, or gals shouldn't be able to, make money off their autograph or whatever. It just doesn't make any sense anymore.
Let's talk about Michigan football first. And actually, let's talk about the Lions first, because that's what I just brought up. But the Lions, to me, are a fascinating team that nobody thought, or maybe you did, the people close to the team a few weeks ago, could actually be the ascendant team in that division. And what are you seeing from that team right now?
Yeah, I don't know if that was something we thought at the beginning of the season here, that they could be, like you said, the ascending team in that division, or a team that maybe wins a division or something, or contends for it. But I think we did get the sense that they were more on the same page in year two of Matt Patricia's run here. Front office and roster and front office, they both seem to be working more together, understanding the plan. The roster, I think, trusts Patricia more. I think Patricia's done a really good job, it seems like, of making himself, I don't want to say more likable, but more trustworthy within his own locker room. I think that they understand the plan better. They're buying into it. They got a new offensive coordinator in Darrell Bevell. They've made some nice draft picks. They've got a solid defense, and then an offense with a quarterback in Matthew Stafford, who I think at this point in his career, what they're trying to do on offense really does fit him very well. So it's a good football team. They're not, anything I would say, they're not on that caliber of maybe a great football team yet, but they're good. I mean, they gave the Chiefs plenty of problems. I think they bothered Patrick Mahomes about as much as anybody really has. Still a few plays here or there away, but certainly a team that you could see that they were trending in the right direction, and now it's about staying there and then maybe making another inch or two.
Can you envision Matt Patricia as a Super Bowl winning coach for the Detroit Lions? Can you picture that?
Not right now. It's hard to do that right now because, that's a good question.
Not so much in the sense of the team right now, but just him. Is he that guy?
It's a really good question, because last year, if you asked that question, there's no way, right? I mean, it just didn't. it just didn't feel like anything really meshed. Maybe it picked up a little later in the season because he was still learning how to be a head coach. I think that was part of it too, and I think he's still learning that. So, yeah, I don't know. It's really hard. I think he's a smart guy. I think he understands football really well. He's a really good defensive mind. For him, it's going to be about what they, putting all your trust in Darrell Bevell and making sure that holds up. It's going to be about what they do offensively with Matthew Stafford and putting pieces around him that really tells the tale at the end of the day there.
What about the defense, though? Because that's been a little different this year. Is that why we're seeing the surge?
Yeah, I mean, they were steady at times last year. They've really invested heavily in the front seven, of course. They actually played the Chiefs without Darius Slay or Mike Daniels, who they picked up, the defensive lineman they picked up in the offseason here. So in terms of plan, Patricia has proven over the year. I mean, he was around Belichick for so long. You're around a guy like that for so long, something's bound to rub off. I mean, in terms of defensive plan, they've been pretty good. And I think that with the additions they've made throughout their defense, whether it be through the draft in the last couple of years, even before Patricia showed up with Bob Quinn, I think it really does sort of fit, in terms of what they want to do. There's a lot of football savvy over there. Jared Davis, is another first-round pick in the inside, the middle of the defense, who's been good when he's healthy. Darius Slay, when he's healthy, is an outstanding corner. They've got guys up front who can get up the quarterback and stuff to run. So, personnel and scheme are starting to fit much better now, and I think that's why you're seeing a competitive team.
We're visiting with Nick Baumgardner of The Athletic. Let's move over to Michigan now. And really, I mean, throw out the Rutgers game. Who knows what that means, right? But the number one, I've got a lot of friends who went to Michigan, and the number one name and the number one coming out of their mouth is Gaddis. Mm-hmm. So what's the situation there? Because I know you just kind of did a story and a deep dive on that situation.
Yeah, so obviously, Jim Harbaugh went into the offseason with the plan of trying to modernize things offensively, getting away from maybe some of the downhill stuff they used to do. And he was still running a lot of the Stanford concepts that he had back in the day through the first couple of years at Michigan. So they wanted to open up. They wanted to get more spread. He hires Josh Gaddis, who's never really done this before. He's 35. He's never had his own offense. He's been a co-coordinator, but I think it's been proven, and it was proven at the time, that Mike Locksley called the plays at Alabama, and Josh Gaddis was involved in game planning and everything else. But this is a brand new situation for him. And really what it's felt like through 4 games, and maybe I guess, like you say, throw the Rutgers game out, but through those first 3 games, it's felt like more of a guy who's calling offense regardless of what his personnel, what their strengths are, and not really adjusting to whatever a defense is doing against him. He was just calling whatever's on the sheet. Whatever I came up with during the week, that's what we're going to do. We're not going to, it's almost felt like they were calling a game without understanding that another team is also playing in the game. So I think there's been a big adjustment in terms of his understanding of how play calling works live in a football game. There's been a big adjustment in terms of some of this different stuff they're trying to do with their run game. And then, it's been disjointed. I mean, they really went from the opposite of starting with a small base and building up and outward. And they started the season by just kind of tossing everything out on the floor and seeing what worked. And it's been a little choppy, to say the least. And, it's kind of put maybe more magnifying glass on, Harbaugh's decision-making in the offseason, and that, the idea of spreading your offense out and opening it up was fine, but this is a young guy who's never done this before, and the hire was made within a day. And I know he says he's followed his career before, but it really did feel a little rushed. And now we're starting to wonder, is everything really on the same page here, or, because they're still in a repair process 4 weeks into the season. So it's not real fluid right now, but I guess there is time to fix it, but you're kind of running out of that.
Well, it's a situation where if you're going to fix it, then the coach made a mistake in who he hired, and I think that's the big question now is I get the sense from a million miles away, there's kind of this impending sense of doom with Harbaugh. Do you see that, or is there something to that?
Yeah, there's this weird. It's very strange because there's not anything to really compare it to. Maybe the best comparison would be somebody like John Cooper when he was at Ohio State, a guy who had a pretty good record but didn't get done exactly what they wanted him to do, so on he had to go. Harbaugh's teams throughout the time here at Michigan, the program's much better than it was when he took it over. There's no doubt about that. They've won 10 games 3 of the 4 years. But they haven't performed on the road against good teams. They haven't beaten Ohio State, and they're not really a playoff caliber football team right now. And I think that's really the thing that's trapping a lot of people or getting people stuck in terms of frustration is that, they expected this to be a team that fixed itself and then pushed itself into the playoff conversation. It fixed itself. It hasn't advanced into the playoff conversation. And now you're in year 5, and you really don't look any closer to that top 4 or top 5 than you did, a year ago, 2 years ago, whatever. So, that's the question now. Is is Jim Harbaugh's system going to be enough to get them into a playoff scenario? If it's not, are you okay winning 9 or 10 games and maybe going to a nice bowl, and maybe once every couple of years you get a break and you get in there? I don't know. And that's the question that I guess folks have to ask themselves. And, right now, all I can say is Michigan's brass, the people in charge and people that matter, have said for, a couple of years now, they want Jim Harbaugh there until he retires. So,
Right.
Until we hear anything different on that one, I don't know why it would be something where they're running him out of town. However, if he starts losing games to bad teams, which he hasn't done yet, that could change the equation, of course.
We're visiting with Nick Baumgartner of The Athletic. So I just, as an aside, it's so ridiculous. And I've seen it. It's been on ESPN where it's a talking point where they're talking about Jim Harbaugh's job status, and they're basing it on online sports books. Just that's have you seen that, Nick?
Yeah. It's the same thing as every time a job opens and people base who the candidates are on sports sides, which is just like, what are we talking about? So no, Las Vegas doesn't hire and fire people. That's for sure. Right.
So, but my question to you is, what does first of all, 2 questions. Can you foresee Jim Harbaugh leaving soon? And if he doesn't want to leave, what does he have to do to keep his job? Peg it a number of wins, whatever that is.
Yeah. The Jim Harbaugh that I first met, I would say the chances of him leaving a situation where he didn't get something accomplished that he wanted to would have been pretty long odds on that. I think he would have stuck it out longer because he wouldn't want to leave a place where he felt like he had something unfinished. I think that's the kind of impression I got early on. Whether or not that's still true, in a year, 2 years, whatever, I have no idea. He's maintained pretty thoroughly that every year the NFL stuff pops up in December, and he's maintained pretty thoroughly that he has no interest in doing any of that. Of course, we all know that exists until it changes. I mean, it's that way until maybe one day he says, I changed my mind. I want to explore other options. Or maybe one day he wakes up and says, the college game is not fair. It's not, the playing field's not level. I want to go to the NFL, back to the NFL, or at least I know what the rules are and everybody has to play under the same sort of umbrella there. So, maybe that could happen one day. It hasn't happened yet. The other thing to remember too is that, he said this in the offseason. His entire family lives here now. I mean, he's got his parents living next door to him in Ann Arbor. His kids are here. I believe this year, all of his kids, he's got like 6 or 7 kids from previous marriage, to a couple from a previous marriage and a couple with his current wife. And they're all here in town. They all live here. He's loving every minute of that. Personally, he loves Ann Arbor. He loves living here. And so that's never been really an issue. It's just a matter of, can you get this thing over the hump and can you get it over the top? What does he have to do to keep his job? I think that if they continue to be, they don't get in really much trouble off the field. Michigan doesn't really have any of those issues. I think if they continue to push forward and show improvement, then I think that all things will be what he wants it to be. But the problem starts to come in now when you have games like that Wisconsin game, when you don't compete and you get run off the field. And if that turns into games where you're losing against teams where talent is less, if you have overmatched opponent where you're losing to those guys, then the equation changes, and that would be a different conversation.
Has his personality evolved or changed? Because it seems like he's been more outspoken and not necessarily in a positive way, let's say in the last 18 months.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that he's the one thing I think I've noticed is that he's more, at least in public anyway, he's more subdued. I think he's less intense. Although that can still creep up now and again. When you talk to him, you can still get into those moments where everything is a competition with him, or even if it's a conversation, there's got to be a winner and a loser. That's all still there. But, in terms of being outspoken, I think he's kind of been that way since he got to Michigan. That's just continued. It's maybe looked less positive on the outside because they're not winning as much. And early on, I think people were very interested to hear all these things. And then after a couple of years of losing to Ohio State, I think people got less interested in hearing these things. He's continued to say them. So in some ways it stayed the same. In some ways, I think he's Brooks. I think he's still trying to figure out, even 5 years in, I think he's still trying to get his finger on the pulse of of managing 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. You know, when you're in the NFL, those are adults, and sometimes they don't act like adults, as we know, but there are ways you can handle. You can cut a player, you can find a player, you can do all these things in a locker room where if it's not going your way. In college, man, if a kid shows up on Tuesday and doesn't want to work, you know, there's things you can do, but it's a much more challenging situation. I still think 5 years in, he's still trying to get his finger on, you know, how to handle younger players, because I think that it's a challenge that some coaches are really, you know, they thrive in that setting, some don't, and I think he's still trying to get back on the groove of that.
Last question: what about Iowa? Could they lose that game? How good is Iowa?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Iowa's a top 20 team at least. Iowa, Wisconsin, you know, they're very, very similar. The one difference being, of course, Iowa doesn't have Jonathan Taylor or a back like that. But I mean, Iowa's a physical team. They haven't given up. I don't believe they've given up 100 yards rushing yet this year. Defensively, they run the ball. It's the same stuff Kirk Ferentz has always done. They're very hard to play if you're going to make mistakes, which is why they're always hard to play on the road. Typically, though, this is a home game for Michigan. This is a game typically Harbaugh's won. You know, they've beat Wisconsin in Ann Arbor twice. They beat Penn State. They've hammered Penn State in Ann Arbor twice. You know, they've beaten good teams in Michigan Stadium because they play better at home and when it's more comfortable. So typically, this has been a game that Harbaugh wins. However, you start losing games like this, and that's when, you know, sort of the questions pop up of, are you going the right? Are you progressing? Or are you falling behind? And so I think this would be a really good telltale for that.
I actually lied. I want to ask you one more thing. What about the level of talent, just talent on this team?
Well, I think it's split because I think that there are spots on this team where they have really, really top end talent. Their wide receivers are very, very talented, which is another thing where people have, you know, kind of scratched their head. They've got a kid, Nico Collins, who's 6'4", 6'5", 215, 220, can run. He's an NFL, you know, receiver, and he's not getting the ball enough at all through 4 games. Donovan Peoples-Jones, another super talented receiver who's been hurt. He's back healthy again. They've got skilled players offensively who are really special. Defensively, they lost a lot of talent, and that's the big difference. Is that Devin Bush is gone. Devin Bush was the best defensive football player. Devin Bush is the best football. I've been covering Michigan 8-9 years. He was the best player they've had since I've been doing this. And so you take him out of the middle of your defense, everything changes. They don't have anybody that's of that caliber. Top 10, top 12 pick, whatever he was. You lost Chase Winovich, Rashawn Gary, David Long. You lost 4 draft picks, 4 draft picks defensively. So they haven't been able to replace those guys, at least not right now. And so talent defensively has dipped. I would say talent offensively is still more than enough to score more points than they're scoring, but defensively it's been a little more noticeable.
Outstanding job. This has been great. I really appreciate it, Nick. Thanks.
Anytime, Brooks. No problem.
That's Nick Baumgartner of The Athletic, and he covers, of course, Michigan football. We talked about the Detroit Lions. He's in the Detroit area. Great guy to lean on. The Athletic's awesome. It just is. If you don't have it, I don't work for The Athletic. I'm not advertising for The Athletic, but get a subscription because there's no ads. It doesn't crash your browser, and it's definitive content across the board. So as I prep for this show, a lot of what you're hearing on this show kind of is an outcropping of that, but it's astonishing how big it's become, and it's only getting bigger as they announced a new initiative for the National Hockey League, bringing in writers for the NHL. Of course, they've done it with the WNBA. And by the way, I was asked by sports media writer, reporter for Front Office Sports, Mike McCarthy, who may join us on this show before the week is out, about the NHL and about specifically the broadcast rights. I mean, I'm not going to talk about the NHL, the teams or what's going on there, but he asked me about the broadcast rights. And so he's writing a story and what my opinion was about how much the broadcast rights would go for, because they're now being negotiated by the NHL along with other networks, because the NHL broadcast deal with NBC is about to conclude. And so it allowed for me to go and look at the NHL, but look at the NHL broadcast situation in the context of the other leagues. And so the NHL is coming off a 10-year deal, $200 million a year, right? Let me repeat that. NBC is right now paying $200 million for the entire NHL broadcast package, regular season, Stanley Cup playoffs, right? $200 million. To put that in perspective, and I mentioned this, this is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And that's for the year, $200 million for the year. I know I repeated it 10 times. I said this earlier. Monday Night Football, Disney ESPN pays $120 million for one game. One. NHL, the whole league, all the games, $200 million. So $200 million, less than 2 games that ESPN pays for the Bengals and the Steelers, right? Wow. And so you talk about a good deal for NBC. I mean, people are watching, and I was looking at the ratings for the NHL. You know, they're drawing over 400,000, between 400,000 and 500,000 people are watching those games on the NBC Sports Network. And the NBC Sports Network is something, you know, we can get it. You can't get the CBS Sports Network. That's not cleared anywhere. So NBC has pretty good distribution. So what's going to happen, though, coming in, and this is a sign of the times, I'm going to explain it to you about, you know, what's really happening in sports television right now. And it really pertains to Fox more than Fox and ESPN to an extent. So ESPN already has, you know, this ESPN Plus service, and they need content. That's why they just signed a big deal with UFC. They've got a big deal with Top Rank. They've got European soccer. Of course, they've got just a mess of college sports. But the NHL is something you would think would be attractive to ESPN, not to put on ESPN, the network, but to put on the app, ESPN Plus, which you got to pay for. That's the whole point of the discussion, $5 a month. And ESPN felt that way last year as they did a deal with the NHL and paid them $100 million. And so now the NHL is on ESPN Plus, and it will be in the future. But I don't foresee ESPN, because they've already got the NBA, making an investment, you know, unless it was a really limited one with the NHL. But so you can put ESPN aside when it comes to that situation. But Fox is different. And NBC, I'm sure they would love to get it back again for $200 million. That'll never happen. It's going to be double, at least double, for the NHL. But Fox is going to slide in because they need programming for FS1. I mean, they should have programming, more weekday evening programming for FS1. That would be a godsend for them, I would think. And Fox's whole business model has changed. It's going with unscripted content and sports content, live sports. They're going away from scripted in every possible way. So this dovetails into the NHL. You've got FS1 and FS2 that are just kind of sitting there. We're watching Undisputed for the 10th time on weekdays on FS1 and FS2. I mean, they've got some original programming, and I want to point out TMZ Sports is one of them. But the NHL would fit right there. And I could see Fox coming in. That's what I wrote in what I sent Mike McCarthy. I could see Fox elbowing their way into that situation because they just need live sports. And the NHL, you know, I do find it really fascinating how, I don't know if you remember, if you're old enough to remember, when the NHL was a legitimate, like a major league sport, where if you had a conversation in this country 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, 25 years, I mean, the NHL, what those players were making in the NHL, it was at the same level as baseball, the NBA, and in some cases, probably better than NFL players. This is the NHL. That was happening for a while. I remember it well. Let's see. We've got a comment, or actually we've got a comment from one of you guys out there asking me about TNT and Bleacher Report. They're already paying a ton for the UEFA Champions League, so they can platform 2/3 of the games to their paid subscription service and air an occasional game on TNT. It's all about, to address that, it's all about, for Gary Bettman, distribution. That's why he's on NBC. NBC has that mainstream clearance, right? When you get into, I mean, look, they want to be on, more specifically when it comes to the NHL, they want to be on over-the-air television. They want to be on something when you get into your hotel room, you can watch an NHL game, right? You don't have to pony up. That's the main goal when we're talking about the broadcast rights situation right now. And I talked to a guy who is the CEO of one of these upstart pro football leagues. It's called Pac Pro, and you're going to be hearing more about it. It's being started by Don Yee, who is Tom Brady's agent. And I went to one of their workouts. This is going to be a summer football league that's going to be a pro league, and it's going to be targeting college-age players, unlike the XFL, which is going to be a minor league. College-age players, might be able to go to the XFL, after 2 years in college. But this league, Pac Pro, they want, the younger players. And this would truly be a developmental league. But they've already struck a deal with NBC. And I talked to their CEO the other day out in wherever they were having out Whittier, where they were having their workouts. And NBC Sports is going to be their distributor. So this is going to be on television soon enough. It's called Pac Pro, Pacific Pro. And from what I understand, they're going to start with 4 teams. And it's an alternative. It's like the XFL, if you're going to get players who aren't eligible, the whole point is that the NFL requires you to spend 3 years in college, 3 years removed out of high school to be eligible for the draft. It's a scam, of course. It's rigged for college football, just like one and done is rigged for college basketball. But Pac Pro is going to come in and undercut that situation, and they're going to go for a kid out of high school. And here's the key. When I was at that workout the other day, which very few people know about right now, and as I said, this is going to be a big thing. This is Tom Brady's agent starting this league. When I was at that workout, they had players there. They're not starting until next summer, but they had prospective players, and they also had players who are trying to get signed right now. And of course, you've got one of the biggest agents. Don has forever been one of the biggest agents. He has an agency. But there were NFL scouts there. They are working with the NFL, not, in a formal way, and it may never be formal because, of course, the NFL has the greatest deal in the history of the world, their own minor league system in development through college football. This, though, could be an alternative. And isn't it interesting that we're starting to see players possibly getting paid with all these laws now, or at least one in California, but the prospect of others? That's something that we're going to talk about over the next few days. We're going to go, hopefully, to these states and get a hold of some people as it pertains to the passage of a possible law pertaining to benefiting financially from your name, image, and likeness in a state like Florida, beginning as early as this year, or Pennsylvania, or Colorado. Those bills are there right now. This could be a gold rush for college football players. We'll address that coming up tomorrow. And so for our producer, Cam Smith in Boston, this is Brooks Melchior saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.